So last Sunday, I said I was going to devote the next two homilies to looking at Ascension, the phenomenon of Ascension. And I did the first homily talking about it. And then on Friday, I suddenly realized that Sunday was going to be Mother's Day. So I had to do a complete pivot, and think about a homily for Mother's Day. So I went through, in my mind, the scriptures, the New Testament, the accounts of, episodes talking about Jesus and Mary together at various stages. And I rearranged them chronologically, and I decided to put it in the form of a diary, as if Mary were keeping a journal, of her life. And so I called it Mother Mary's Diary, and I picked out 7 entries. Entry number 1. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to my hometown, Nazareth. I was a virgin, engaged to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David. My name is Mary. He came to me and said, "Greetings, favored one. The Lord is with you." But I was much perplexed by his words and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. The angel said to me, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus." Entry number 2. So Joseph and I went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because Joseph belonged to the house and the line of David. He went there to register with me, who was pledged to be married to him. I was expecting a child. While we were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and I gave birth to my firstborn, a son. I wrapped him in swaddling clothes and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for us. Entry number 3. When the time came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, Joseph and I took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. Now, there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon, who was righteous and devout. Moved by the Spirit, he went into the temple courts. When we brought our child to do for him what the custom of the law required, Simeon took him in his arms and praised God. Then Simeon blessed us and said to me, as the child's mother, "This child is destined to cause the falling and the rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be opposed, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed. And a sword will pierce your own soul too." Entry number 4. Every year, Joseph and I went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When Jesus was 12 years old, we went up to the festival according to the custom. After the festival was over, while we were returning home, our child Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but we were unaware of it. Thinking he was somewhere in the group, we traveled on for a day. Then we began looking for him among our relatives and friends. When we did not find him, we went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, we found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When we saw him, we were astonished. I said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But we did not understand what he was saying to us. Entry number 5. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. When our extended family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, "He's out of his mind." Then his brothers and I arrived. Standing outside, we sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, "Your mother and your brothers are outside looking for you." "Who are my mother and my brothers?" he asked. Then he looked around at those seated in a circle around him and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother." Entry number 6. On the 3rd day of the week, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. I was there. And Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When all the wine had run out, I said to him, "They have no more wine." "Mother, why do you involve me with this?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." But I overrode him and said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And the final entry. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic we call Golgotha. There they crucified him. And with him, 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. I was standing near the cross, as well as my sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw me there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to me, "Mother, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took me into his home. These are words inspired by God. My great-grandmother's name was Margaret O'Sullivan, but I couldn't pronounce Margaret as a small little child, and so somehow I managed to make it sound like Muddy. So I called her just Muddy, and everybody picked up on it, and she was known thereafter as Muddy. And she was this tiny little woman, maybe 5 feet high and about 5 feet 3 wide. And she lived in number 3 Washington Street in Cork City on the 3rd story of a high-rise apartment. And there was one communal toilet for the entire building, all 3 stories of it, and maybe 15 different families. And she'd wheeze her way up the stairs to the very, very top of the house, wheezing and gasping her way up. Now, I lived with my grandparents, her daughter, for the first 6 years of my life. And very, very often I'd actually go and spend time with Muddy in her apartment. And when I did, every single morning we'd go to 3 masses. There were 3 beautiful churches within a mile of where she lived. One was a Franciscan church, the other was the parish church, and the other was an Augustinian church. So one was called the Church of St. Francis, and we'd go there for Mass. And then we went on to the parish church, which was called Saints Peter and Paul. And then we'd finish up at St. Augustine's church. They were all within 1 mile. Now, of all of those churches, my favorite one was St. Augustine's, because the most realistic, life-size, sculpted crucifixion scene I've ever come across in my life was in the entryway of that church. As you came into the church, this was the first thing you saw. And then you take a left and go into the church, properly speaking. And I've checked this out over the years so that it wasn't just a childhood impression. But every time I see it, it is easily the most realistic, life-size, sculpted crucifixion scene I've ever seen. It's like you're looking at real people who, in their utter grief, have been frozen into stone. There's Mother Mary, there's Magdalene, and there's John, and they literally look like they're just petrified human beings in the technical sense of petrified, which means to be turned into stone. And so that's what I want to talk about today on this great feast of Mother's Day. I'm going to make 3 main points this morning. Firstly, I'm going to talk about Mother Gaia, the planet Pachamama. Then secondly, I'm going to talk about Mother Mary. And then thirdly, I'm going to talk about what I'm going to call Mater Dolorosa, Woman of Sorrows. So there are the 3 points I'll make this morning. So firstly, Mother Gaia, Pachamama. I believe that motherhood is the ultimate Eucharist. And I've said this to you many, many times, that when Jesus decided to leave us one final symbol of his, inexpressible love for us, he left us the symbol of feeding us from his own body and blood, which is precisely what your mother did for you. Mothers are those who literally fashion us from their own bodies and blood in utero, and then put us on their breasts and feed us from their own body subsequently. So motherhood is the ultimate expression of Eucharist. And when I look at our planet, Gaia is the ultimate earth mother who offers us Eucharist on a daily basis. As I look around me just out here, for instance, at the mountains and the trees around here, I'm looking at a Eucharistic banquet which has been set for us by Gaia. Now, we read in the beginning of the Hebrew scriptures that God worked for 6 days and then took the 7th day off. And this is symbolic, obviously. But in reality, Gaia never takes a day off from caring for us, clothing us, and feeding us. So when you think of what are our needs as human beings, you could kind of divide them into 2 categories of needs. There are the immediate urgent needs, and then there are kind of the long-term needs. What are the immediate urgent needs? The first one, obviously, is air. We can only survive without air for a couple of minutes maximum. And then comes water. We can survive without water for maybe a maximum of 7 days. And then food. You know, we can actually survive without food for something between 70 and 120 days. There was a famous case in Cork City in Ireland during the War of Independence when 2 O'Shea brothers, were jailed and they went on hunger strike, which was being done quite a bit at that stage. That's where Gandhi got his idea of hunger striking from. And these 2 brothers survived 120 days without food. They had water, but no food. And so food is not quite on the same level as water, which is not on the same level as air. But Gaia gives us all those. All the air we get is from our mother Gaia. All the water we drink is from our mother Gaia. All the food we eat is from our mother Gaia. And then the second kinds of needs are kind of more long-term needs. We all need shelter, we all need health, and we all need education in some way. And Gaia provides all of these for us. Shelter, every place we live has come from our mother. Whether we're living in a cave or a home constructed of lumber or cement or whatever, all of the ingredients in the home in which you live and the homes in which you've ever lived have been provided for you by your mother Gaia. Your health is because Mother Gaia creates all of these various plant lives from which our medicines are taken. So she's constantly offering us healing opportunities. And our education, the greatest teacher of all, you'll never find a better teacher than nature itself. In fact, there's an organization that meets annually in San Rafael, and it draws members from all over the world, and it's called the Bioneers. And the Bioneers, it's from pioneer and bio, meaning life. And they're people in every walk of life. They come from, they're visionaries of various kinds. They're psychologists, they're priests, they're artists, they're lawyers, they're agriculturalists. But they're looking to nature to see, how does nature solve its problems? When nature encounters a problem, what does she do with it? Looking for inspiration to saying, if we could imitate what nature does, we could solve all our problems organizationally at every single level. So Gaia is providing all of our needs, the immediate needs like air and the long-term needs like education. And what has been our response as a human species? Some are very, very good and some are atrocious. So for instance, in our times, we've turned agriculture into agribusiness. We've polluted the air, which is our breath or our spirit. We've polluted the earth, the soil itself, which is our body. And we polluted the water, which is our bloodstream. We have been ravaging instead of replacing. We have been grabbing instead of being grateful. I've said to you many times that there's a code, there's a Eucharistic code such that when you're reading the scriptures and you find these 4 words, you know you're in the presence of a Eucharistic encounter. When Jesus took, blessed, broke, and distributed, what was happening? Jesus is taking with gratitude and saying to us, this is how we have to respond to our mother, the earth. We accept gratefully what she offers to us. We don't grab it from her. Secondly, we bless it. And as I say, blessing is not the imparting of benediction to a previously inert substance. It is recognizing the inherent blessedness of everything that Gaia offers to us. So blessing is about recognition. It's not about imparting something that was missing. And then he broke it. In other words, he's attempting to create models of distribution where everybody has all of their needs met. And then finally, he distributed, he gave it to people. And that needs to be our relationship to Pachamama, to our mother. The ability to take gratefully what she offers us. The ability to bless it by recognizing its inherent sanctity. The ability to think of models in which everybody has their needs met. And then finally, to make sure that we walk the talk by making these resources available to everybody else. So agriculture to agribusiness has this been huge, big insult to Pachamama. The next one, I believe, is big pharma, where in the past we have looked to nature, we've taken medicines and plant lives, and particularly maybe in the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, the great wise women, you know, and I'm thinking particularly of Europe where I come from. I'm thinking of people like Hildegard von Bingen, these extraordinary women healers who took plant from around them and used those in a medicinal fashion. You know, but now instead of that, we've got big pharma making billions of dollars on products and trying to patent them. And just instead of looking to nature and being grateful for what nature offers us, it's the ravaging of nature, the pillaging, and then the selling at high prices. We have a medical model which is not about healing, but about disease management. That instead of encouraging people to live really healthy lives through their diet and through exercise and adequate sleep and whatever, we're depending upon foreign substances in our bodies to make us healthy. And I look at, unfortunately, the downside of Silicon Valley, where I've been privileged to live for 34 years. And I see what the agenda seems to be there. It seems to be a eugenics agenda, a transhumanist agenda, and a cyborg, where we're attempting to move human beings from carbon-based life forms into silicon-based life forms. Now, that's very, very different from the energy in which I grew up and the energy in which most of the world grew up. I think of being raised as a Celt. And I see that for the Celts, you know, there was this extraordinary dance between nature and culture. So, for instance, in Irish mythology, the archetypes of nature are the goddesses, and the archetypes of culture are the gods. And it's a dance, it's a loving dance between them. It's a dance between dark and light. And for the Celts, dark was not bad and light good. They were both partners in this extraordinary dance, because darkness represented the mystery, the fecund womb out of which everything might subsequently emerge. And light represented manifestation, what came out of the darkness as a birth, as a birthing. For us, it was the dance between Samhain and Bealtaine. Samhain is October 31st, November 1st, you know, the darkest period of the year begins. And Bealtaine, which we've just celebrated, the 1st of May, is the beginning of the summer in Europe. And so it's a dance, it's not a struggle between the two, which is very different from what we encounter in the rest of the West. And I go back even further, back to the Buddha. Now, interesting, the Buddha lived about the very same time that the Celts reached Ireland, about 550 BCE. And in Buddhism, there's this beautiful saying, emptiness is form and form is emptiness. And it's capturing the same idea that the Celts have between the masculine and the feminine, between the dark and the light. So what does it mean that emptiness is form? It means that the womb is the place, the no-thingness, out of which all manifestation emerges. And we have that as a statement in our beautiful Eucharistic prayer of the cosmos, the no-thingness. So it is the fertile possibilities out of which all manifestation subsequently emerges. So that's what emptiness being form means. And then form is emptiness. You take any form, any life form, and Thich Nhat Hanh put this very beautifully when he said, if you take a flower and you take away all of the elements that go into it, you don't have a flower. If there were no air, if there were no water, if there were no soil or nutrients or chlorophyll from the sun, there wouldn't be a flower. So if you were to extract all of these elements, flower does not exist. So form is emptiness. Any form you see is composed of elements, which if you take away, you don't have the manifestation. So this is the dance, that you find in the great mystical traditions between nature and nurture. So that's my first point then, Mother Gaia, the planet as our mother. The second point that I want to make is Mother Mary. Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary, the mother of all of us in a sense. And as I say, on Friday, I suddenly realized it's Mother's Day on Sunday. So I had to abandon a notion of Ascension and begin thinking about what did motherhood mean to Mary. And as I kind of went in my memory through the scriptures, all of the references to Mary, I wrote about 7 of them in her diary, but I picked out actually 10 different escapades between them. And so I'm going to work my way through those right now. And you'll find some of these as the kind of the mysteries of the rosary that we were brought up with as kids. So number one then would be to look at Annunciation. What does the Annunciation mean? Her first entry that the angel Gabriel came to her and said, you are to be the mother of the Mashiach, What does that mean? For me, this, as maybe a 15-year-old girl, was Mary being invited to make an incarnated yes to the preconception contract. I believe that before we incarnate at any stage, we make a contract with other souls with whom we're going to come in. I call it a preconception contract. We're going to have particular kinds of relationships, particular kinds of roles, and particular kinds of missions. And now, as a 15-year-old girl, Mary is making the conscious decision. She has some kind of visionary experience in which the angel Gabriel appears to her and invites her to remember what her contract was. And she says, no, yes, very definitely, I'm making a conscious yes to my preconception contract. So that in fact is the first encounter between Jesus and Mary. Very first one, the Annunciation. The next one then will be the birth itself. And when Mary birthed Jesus, it's not just a relationship between a mother and a son. It's partners in a divine dance bringing about Christ consciousness in our world. So this wasn't simply about the physiological delivery of a fetus, from a womb. It was an extraordinary, beautifully choreographed dance between two great souls whose objective was to create Christ consciousness in our world. So that will be the birth. That's the next encounter, in a sense. The third encounter then will be what's been called the presentation in the temple. And so it was incumbent upon all children who were born to be presented in the temple to God, particularly firstborn children. And so they make the safari from Nazareth up in Galilee down to Jerusalem to the temple to present the child and to make an offering. And then they meet this prophetic character called Simeon and an elderly woman called Anna. And Simeon takes the baby in his arms, and he blesses it. And he says some wonderful things about it. And the parents are quelling. They're so proud of what, this old man is saying about their baby. But then there's a sting in the tail. And finally he says to them, this child is destined for the fall and the rise of many in Israel. He will be a sign which will be contradicted or opposed, depending which translation you choose to use, so that the secret thoughts of many may be laid bare. And you can imagine the parents thinking, what does that mean? And then Simeon goes on even more pointedly, and he turns to Mary and he says, and you, your own soul, the sword will pierce. And I can imagine as a young mother just giving birth to her firstborn child, what does that mean? What is he talking about? And it reminds me of something that Paul said subsequently in one of his letters, that the discipleship, Paul said, costs not less than everything. Discipleship costs not less than everything. And here was the invitation to Mary. She's been presented immediately at a 15, 16-year-old girl with the realization that the contract you've entered into will cost you not less than everything in your character and in your life. The fourth episode, I believe, was the story of Jesus being lost in the temple. Of course, he wasn't lost. He was only lost to Mary and Joseph. He wasn't lost to himself or to his mission. And, they find him in the temple. There's this interchange, and Mary is really upset. Why did you do this to us? We spent 3 days looking for you. And Jesus says, didn't you realize I must be about my Father's business? And we're told in Luke's Gospel at the end of chapter 2 that they went back to Nazareth and Mary pondered all these things in her heart. Now, why is that? It's because even, very advanced souls, there's amnesia created. As soon as we're born, there's amnesia. And we have to discover the mission, step by step by step. As we come to various crossroads, I'm going to have to decide, do I go to the right or to the left or keep going straight ahead? So the plan only reveals itself gradually because amnesia is part of the contract. So she's still trying to figure out, what did he mean when he said, I have to be in my Father's house? So she's trying to figure out the details and the timing of her contract and her relationship with her son. That for me is kind of the story of being lost in the temple. Number 5 is from Mark's Gospel. There's this extraordinary episode in Mark's Gospel in chapter 3. You'll find it in verse 21 and in verse 31, where as Jesus has just begun his public ministry, I put in the word extended family in the diary today. His extended family heard about it and they thought he'd flipped his lid, literally. This was a nice, quiet carpenter, and all of a sudden he's pretending to be a rabbi and a teacher and a healer. And they're freaking out. He's going to destroy the good name of the family. So they come to take him by force. They're going to put a straitjacket on and tell him to kind of cop himself on, and go back home and take up a hammer and a chisel and nails and go back to what he knows. And when he refuses to see them, they go and they gather Mary, and his brother says, your son he's flipped his lid, he's gone crazy. Come down and talk some sense to him. And in verse 31, we are told that Mary and the brothers arrive, but he's inside in the house, surrounded by a big, big group of people, and they can't get at him. So they send in a message, and he's told, your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside, and they want to talk to you. And Jesus looks around and says, who is my mother? And who are my brothers and sisters? I'll tell you who my mother is and who my brothers and sisters are. They're those who hear the word of God and keep it. Now, this, far from being a put down of Mary, is actually an exaltation. I'll tell you who my mother is. My mother is the one who hears the word of God and acts according to it. And if anybody did it, she did it in spades. It's not a put down of who Mary is. It's an exaltation and a realization. It's the celebration of his mother. The next encounter would be in John's Gospel in chapter 2, where the wedding feast of Cana, where Mary has been invited and Jesus and his disciples have been invited as well. And after 3 days feasting, they run out of wine, which is going to be really, really, really embarrassing for the young couple. And Mary comes and says, they have no wine. And Jesus says, so? What concern of mine is that? My hour has not yet come. I'm not ready yet to launch myself into the miracle phase of my ministry. And Mary just gives one quick look at him, ignores him, overrides him, and says to the stewards, whatever he does, follow it. And Jesus, and he goes on and he turns 130 gallons of water into wine to save the embarrassment for the group. Number 7 for me would be, his ministry. So now she's watching her son and she's seeing what's happening, the extraordinary teaching that's coming from him, the healings that he's doing, the effect he's having on ordinary people, and the extraordinary vilification to which he's subject. And you can imagine as a mother watching the successes, and the trials of your child as the world, is responding to him. So it's part pride and it's part terror of what the outcome is going to be. And indeed, the outcome is crucifixion, which will be kind of the 8th encounter. So can you imagine what it's like to watch one of your children get executed? Even if he were a criminal, in an electric chair that was a mass murderer, and you're still his mother, and you've been told you need to attend and watch him being fried, what it would be like to be a mother in that instance. But you look at a mother whose son, was such an extraordinary, loving, compassionate healer, and you're watching him being tortured in the fashion in which he was tortured and killed in that fashion. What do you think you'd be feeling as a mother? What would your understanding of this situation be? And then we move forward to the resurrection scene. And this for me is a very strange one. There is not a single record of Jesus appearing to his mother after the resurrection. We are told, in the Gospels and in Paul's writing, 14 different occasions on which he appeared to individual people or little groups of people, and one time 500 in a row. So why is there no mention of any appearance of Jesus to his mother after his resurrection? And my hit on it is this, that those encounters, and I think there were many of them, that those encounters were far too personal and far too important to be made part of the public record. I have no doubts whatsoever that they have spent quality time together trying to kind of finally figure out the ending of the story. And the ending of the story happens at the Ascension. And it is another parting. Mothers have to continually, let go. There's a great Irish poet called Pádraig Pearse who wrote a poem called The Mother, in which he says, we suffer at their coming and we suffer at their going if a child predeceases you. And so in some senses, here's our son now ascending. His mission is complete. Her mission is not complete yet. She's going to spend another 30 plus years without Jesus as a partner in her life, an earth partner in the sense of being physically present. So once more, she's been asked, to accept a separation from her own son. What do you think that felt like for her as she watched this last episode in the earthly safari of her son, realizing that she had many, many more years to spend, and she would never lay eyes upon him during those 30 or 40 years. So that's my second point. Mary Mother Mary. The third point I'm going to make then is I call it Mater Dolorosa. And Mater Dolorosa literally means the grieving mother. And it's one of the titles given to Mary. And my second favorite sculptor of all time is the Pieta. You know, the Pieta, this extraordinary marble, sculpted by, I think his name, I'm lost his name right now, Michelangelo. Was it Michelangelo or Leonardo? Michelangelo, I think. This Jesus body draped over his mother's knees and arms, cast in marble. This extraordinary scene. And the title of it then could be called not just the Pieta, but the Mater Dolorosa, the grieving mother. So I personally want to dedicate this Eucharist today to all mothers who've lost a child, whether it's through a miscarriage or a stillbirth, whether it's through sudden infant death syndrome, whether it was an accident, whether it was in warfare, whether it was through suicide, or whether it was through an illness. I want to dedicate this Mass today to all of those grieving mothers who've lost a child, for whom a child went before them. And I'm thinking especially today of my own sister Deirdre, whose child was stillborn after a 9-month pregnancy. She was destined to be an extraordinary mother and never got the opportunity. I'm thinking of people I know in our own community, and there may be many others that I'm blocking right now. I'm thinking of people like Margaret Park, who lost a son, Carl O'Neill, who lost a son, Rita Estrada, for whom, all these women whose children have predeceased them. And so as I think of today as Mother's Day, for me, it's a time of celebration and a time of mourning, a realization that, as Pádraig Pearse says, mothers suffer at our coming, birthing us, and they suffer at our going if we predecease them. But I want to end by saying this. Death appears to be the ultimate separation, but it's merely a separation from the illusion that I am my spacesuit. It is a separation, but it's a separation of the illusion that I am my spacesuit. It's not a separation of our souls. And if I were to ask, the first breath for me a little baby takes is the affirming cry of commitment to the incarnational mission. That's the very first cry a child makes. It's a kind of a yes to the realization that I'm incarnated. I'm going to live out this mission of mine. And what would I say about the final breath that somebody takes? I'm going to paraphrase something here that you all know and say, for me, the last breath is one small step for the spacesuit and one giant leap for the soul. Thank you and bless you, mothers of the world.